But anyway, as he said, I'm Brittany Woods. I'm an automation engineer for Carfax, but I also practice the DevOps when I can, when it's being done correctly. But when it's not, I give advice and I have opinions and I make those opinions heard, all of those things. So yesterday with Barry, you heard me talking about whenever you go on a DevOps transformation, you end up having gaps. So DevOps is supposed to be all about bridging the space between developers and operations. And we hear talk after talk on how this is being done at company X. But they don't actually say what they all have in common. They're just like, this is how we did it. So they don't talk about like the common pitfalls between the different implementations. So since we're all going down this path, I think it's important to make those known. And there's also several reasons to go down this path. The two major players are to drive innovation and then to collaborate. You want everybody to be innovative, but also you want them to collaborate. So what does a company need to consider whenever they start this journey? And also, because I'm a haver of opinions, just a side note, I want to make it clear that in my opinion, DevOps is not just devs doing work, right? That defeats the purpose of everyone coming together. So, just an opinion for you all. So, the gaps that I talked about yesterday are the gaps I'm going to talk about today, but I'm going to talk a little longer than 5 minutes today. So, there's duties, knowledge, process, and empathy. I could argue that they all kind of fit together, and if you solve one right or two right, then you're solving multiple right. But as I mentioned yesterday, the duties gap is where your teams are segmented. They don't want to help each other out. Knowledge is, of course, they don't speak the same language. Process is kind of business-driven gap, but it's just bad process. And then empathy is where nobody cares about how anybody else feels. So the duties gap. A lot that we can derive from the duties gap has been talked about before, and that's that there's this wall of confusion in between developers and operations. So the devs, they just throw their software over the wall, and then ops gets frustrated, and then the devs don't have the incentive to care about any kind of long-term support with the software that they ship. They're just like, we're doing cool things, and toss it over. The same can be said, though, with operations humans confusion, or not confusion, sorry, how they get upset, because they want stability. That's what they care about. They care about stability, they care about customer impact. Developers may or may not share those same feelings because they care about the code. So that's the duties gap. The next one's the knowledge gap. So operations humans have in recent history started scripting and doing repeatable tasks because there's this drive for automation over the last decade, right? But the scripts still kind of require human interaction. So we went into this like continuously integrating, automating future, and that requires more robust code. So since it's becoming more and more prevalent through the industry, everybody kind of needs to understand how this is working, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be second nature to everyone. So there's that problem. But then you also have developers who know code, and so this isn't a problem for them at all. They know code, they understand code, that's what they live, breathe, and stand on the hill for every single day. So they're not going to understand any kind of implications that may arise from not being able to move quickly in that direction. So then you have process. So the reason why developers, in my opinion, the reason why historically developers would want to throw things over the wall is because process dictated that they had to. Developers can't do X for Y reason because it's an audit, et cetera. And I understand that those still exist, right? But if we have more codified processes in place, those situations get smaller. So the business has to drive the process change because you can't just change process. The business has to be involved. So that means you're going to have buy-in from stakeholders to streamline and automate and all of the things for DevOps. And arguably, I would say that at least this kind of buy-in has to come first. You can't You can make a business case for it, but you can't just go and do the bits because then you're shadow IT. And then there's process overkill that I want to talk about just a teeny bit as well. So back before I was born, really, in the 80s and 90s, I was born in 90, by the way. So in the 80s and 90s, there was this movement that you can read about pretty much anywhere, that we needed more process. That if you didn't have process, you were going to have problems. You were going to have errors. You were going to have more human error. So you needed processes. So all of these processes kind of lingered around and hung out, and now we still have them, and we're trying to do this DevOps movement. And DevOps sees that, and they're like, we don't want process, though. We want to just be able to innovate. So you have to draw this line and be like, process is okay, and standards are okay, but you can't overkill it like we did before. Because everything's going in code now, you don't have people clicking buttons, and you don't have people copy and pasting data. So you don't really need to over-process your business. You just need to give it a line. Barry yesterday talked about following the same path for your automation. So if you have 20 teams doing 20 different things because they don't want to process, that becomes a problem. All right, and so empathy. Empathy kind of, whenever you start bringing your business together, your operations people and your developers, and you start doing the DevOps bits, empathy almost solves itself. So again, Ops has been dealing for years with code that may or may not be stable. And then you have developers that are dealing with the red tape that they think Ops has put in place, but really Ops is just trying to keep the lights on. So there's an empathy problem. Neither of the two can understand each other. So that's how we got to where we're at. But Chef can help. So we're all at ChefConf, we know. So there's a slew of tools that kind of were born in this DevOps era. So this isn't unique to Chef by any means. But I want to illustrate how you can use Chef or how you can implement Chef in your organization to fix these problems, or at least make them less painful. So first, duties and knowledge. So that wall of confusion I talked about, much like the Kool-Aid man, Chef can come in and break that down. So if your entire technical organization is using Chef, then everyone has to be somewhat on the same page. They have to be aware of its development, its process, its interactions, its consequence. So whenever you get everyone caring about that same thing, it can be a big driver for shattering that wall and breaks down that barrier, right? So we can also all secure our systems. So Chef Inspec makes testing and for security and testing your code easier. But then whenever you start doing this, everyone becomes invested in security. So it's not like before where you're like, hey, security team, am I doing things secure? Or, hey, security team, I'm following the process you have in place, but maybe there's this hole here. We're all testing our stuff. We understand what it's doing, and we understand long-term what our systems look like. So by doing all of this, the duties gap is going to grow smaller because now we're all caring about security. Developers care about security. Operations cares about security. But Chef Inspec allows you to also audit your code and systems and cloud config. And so it's all in code too, right? So it's just this big vicious cycle of learning different types of code that bring all of your teams together, and it puts your business in a better place. And also, I have in my notes a dun-dun-dun. I'm not going to do it because I didn't set it up properly, but I thought that you should know that there's a dun-dun-dun there. So, Chef Infra, DSL, Ruby, and you. So we talked about how in the past, scripting was pretty much commonly how you would automate the bits. But Chef Infrastructure allows you to move the scripts into cookbooks or as you like, as you learn. So you don't have to, day one, understand every little piece about Chef. Your organization doesn't have to understand every little piece about Chef. You can take a gradual approach, and in my opinion, this isn't like an opinion on high, but in my opinion, it's all good, right? Because you're moving to a better future, you're collaborating, and you're trying, right? So the more you learn and the more you've chefed your cookbooks, the closer your teams are going to be to speaking that same language. So developers may not resonate with like the scripting you had to do in the past, but they can resonate with the code that you're writing because it's built in a DSL based on Ruby. And even further, you can expand Chef and use just pure Ruby, and then you're writing code. So that's going to bridge that knowledge gap because we're all doing development work. We're all following development processes. The cookbooks have to go through a pipeline, source control, all of the buzzwords. So automation mindset, code, and collaboration. So whenever you travel down this DevOps path, it's also going to push you to automate more, right? So in doing this automation, there's more room for collaboration. Developers and operations, they can use the Chef enterprise automation stack, really, and automate everything from the whole scheme, from your infrastructure to your application. But look at the tools that they're really providing you. You can automate your configuration with Chef Infra. You can automate testing and compliance with Inspec. You can automate your applications with Habitat. And then you have Automate sitting on top that allows you to not only integrate across multiple platforms, but really get visibility into what you're doing. You can visibly see your compliance. You can see your configuration changes. So they're giving you a powerful set of tools to really enforce DevOps practices within your organization. And so then there's a language between us. So after your operations teams are using Chef, their everyday buzzwords, they start looking a lot like those of a developer. So even if they're not using the same languages or tools, their primary concerns are going to be the same. So if you were to look at their buzzwords, which I don't have an illustration, and I wish I did. Sorry, I lost a mouse. I think we're having laptop problems. Oh, nice. So if you were to look at a list of their buzzwords, in the developer world, they think about pipelines, they think about release process, dependency management, testing, development, peer reviews. But then whenever you start using Chef, look at operations buzzwords, right? So you're thinking about pipelines for your cookbooks. You're thinking about dependency management for your cookbooks. You're thinking about testing your code with Inspec. You're thinking about development of that code. And you're thinking about peer reviews. We're thinking about the same things. So it makes it 100% easier to work together because we care about the same things now. So process. Process is kind of a hard one, I'll be real. So programmatic changes are going to be repeatable. Programmatic changes are going to be testable. So the argument can be made that the same can be said for human changes, but they aren't codified. Human error is going to be a huge factor in human changes, which causes a problem. That's, like I said earlier, that's where processes came from. That's why they were born in the 80s and 90s, is because you had to reduce human error. But this is also going to reduce the cost of the business because humans are free to work on the things that provide value, so you're generating revenue for your company. You are reducing the overhead of keeping those old processes in place. And honestly, all of that is just a thing of the past. If you want to usher in this movement and you want your business to be able to move forward, this is where the industry is going. So iteration, past processes often tell us that if it's not broken, why should we fix it? But that kind of flies in the face of DevOps, so you can't have that mentality and the DevOps mentality in the same bucket. So was it broken to be a successful company not using DevOps is a question. It's not, but DevOps is kind of an iteration on all of these methodologies, if you will, that we've been seeing over the past decade. So to make something better doesn't necessarily mean that it's broken. It just means that you want to be able to iterate faster. And also, DevOps requires iteration on itself. So nobody's going to start their DevOps transformation knowing exactly what it's going to look like for their organization. There's going to be many, many, many ways to do the DevOps. And people will tell you there's only one way to do the DevOps. Don't listen to those people because there's multiple ways to do it. I've seen multiple ways. I've done multiple ways. There's no right way. So what you should not do, though, like I said earlier, shameless plug, don't get rid of all of your processes and say, now I am become DevOps, because that's not DevOps at all. You have to have process in place, just not processes for everything and not processes that are restrictive in a way that's going to keep your business from thriving. Auditability. So when things are in code, it's much easier to audit changes that are happening to a system. We all know this. So if you have somebody logging into a system and making changes manually, you can look at logs. You can see a history of that, but then you have to dig for that information. If it's all in code and we can see exactly what happened, when it happened, and when that was changed, auditors love that. So even running scripts on a system may not provide the auditability that you need. So this keeps us from going and gathering screenshots of people logging into systems and seeing what our settings are, because we have our settings in code. So if anything's changed on that system manually, that code with Chef is going to revert that change, and so it doesn't matter, really. I mean, it matters, but you know what I mean. So Chef is going to allow you to package all of these changes and run them in a consistent manner. They're going to be stored in version control. Those changes are going to be happening through a pipeline, but there's also Chef Automate, so you can store and visualize that data in one place. So we can even take that one step further, because Chef information can be extracted and placed wherever you want. For example, with Carfax, I haven't mentioned them much, but with Carfax, we are porting a lot of data over into ServiceNow, and we're making that data actionable. So if a cookbook fails, for example, since multiple teams are working on those cookbooks, like I mentioned yesterday, we have a multiple team implementation. Whoever owns that cookbook is the one that cares that it's failing, and the ones that can actually do something about it. So we send that information over to ServiceNow and create an incident based on that failure and send it directly to that team. So Chef gives you the ability to harness data and not only have things be actionable, but ServiceNow has an audit trail, so we can see that that cookbook cookbook broken. So we can see that, and we can correlate that, and we can understand what the health of our systems are. But if we were to ever be audited, the auditors can see that as well, and we don't have to do any digging. We have a full history of everything that's happening to that system. And so then there's empathy. I have an empathy cat who wants to walk in your shoes. But all of these things are going to tie together, and it's going to literally facilitate empathy. So Chef, by extension, facilitates empathy. When you get all of your teams working in the same way, we can all understand each other, and we can both, through knowledge, walk in each other's shoes. So it's also important to remember that we shouldn't be looking at each other as other. It only takes one developer reaching across the line, or one operations person reaching across the line and empathizing with the other to shift an entire group's attitude. And so when you're looking at attitudes, sometimes operations has the attitude that developers can't possibly understand, and developers think the same thing. Operations humans can't possibly understand, and those are toxic terms that you shouldn't use. But on the other side of that coin, this is kind of like the real reality that we've all been thrown in, right? Because DevOps is not going to prescribe you a method. So we've gotten into this like toxic future of DevOps, and just don't do that. Be that person that reaches across the line and says, I want to make this organization better, and bring those teams together. So coming together and reducing that otherness is going to, like I said, help this. And using Chef's tack as that jumping off point to bring the two sides together is a really good way to start that conversation. At Carfax, like I mentioned, we're using Chef across teams. And while we started with just infrastructure, our development teams use it too. So if nothing else, if we don't feel like we can be comfortable in a conversation, we can talk about Chef. And that in itself facilitates empathy and understanding and being able to go to that one developer that you trust and saying, hey, look at this problem. And then whenever you trust them, then you trust their team, and then it just proliferates through. So how can Chef spark a personal change? I mentioned being that person that jumps across and does the things. So much like bridging that knowledge gap, it can lead a person on a path for personal change. It did for me. It can give you knowledge, confidence, and it bridges that duties gap, that empathy gap. For me, it started when I learned Chef. But it wasn't that I learned how to code because I already knew how to code. It was that learning Chef kind of made me a part of this distinguished group, right? It was this small group, and by small I mean the community, so it's not small at all. But it was this group that allowed me to separate myself from this pack, and as a woman in tech, that's kind of important, right? But it allowed me to prove to not only myself, but to others that I am able to do the bits, right? So it gave me that confidence to grow myself and stand up here and talk after I cheated my way through public speaking. So Chef will give you that, and Chef will give you that confidence. And it was also my introduction to DevOps. Like, that's why I am such a believer in the power that Chef can have in tools like Chef on a DevOps transformation, because I didn't know anything about DevOps. I would script some things and run some scripts, and I didn't know anything about this whole movement until I joined the Chef community. And I honestly believe it's critical to where I'm at. So a shameless plug, meeting people like Matt Stratton and others like Matt Stratton really helped me understand and have a passion for DevOps, and then how to breed organizational change. Like, I thought the organization just had to decide on its own, I want to change. But that's not the case. They will never decide on their own, I want to change. They'll say, I want to drive business value, but it's up to all of us in this room to spark that change. So from there, I began thinking in a more automated way, and then this is where we are. So Chef can absolutely spark a personal change, and that personal change can go on to spark a DevOps movement within whatever organization you're a part of. And I have some time, quite a bit of time, actually, for questions. So does anybody have any questions? Dan Bright has a question.
So since I know you, and when you just said that you cheated your way through public speaking, I really want to hear more about that.
So it is kind of a funny story, but I took public speaking online. When you take public speaking online, you have to video record your speech. It was a requirement that 6 people be in the room watching you talk. So, being the intelligent mind that I am, I had those 6 people sit behind the camera. I would then rotate the camera to show that they existed. Once the camera was past them, they would run out the door and quietly close it, and I would give my speech to an empty room and edit out the bits of me turning off the camera. So that is how I cheated my way through public speaking. I'm smart when I need to be. Does anybody have any other questions? I know I kind of went on some tangents, and I know that it wasn't quite a technical talk, but I found that, especially lately, doing DevOps in a way that is healthy for humans has become kind of a small passion project of mine. So I just wanted to illustrate like how you can have a healthy DevOps implementation, whatever that looks like for your organization, using the tools that we have at our disposal today. Yep. Oh, he's going to give you a thing, so the recording will pick you up.
Hello. So this is disconcerting. My voice coming from over there. I can't remember my question.
I can't remember my whole speech, so.
Okay, here's the question. So the difficulty that I'm having personally is convincing other people that it's actually in their best interest to adopt these new methodologies. Now, I've shown them the chef stuff. I've built this nice self-healing infra, fully ephemeral, etc. The results are great, but I still can't convince people that they should throw in. They still seem to think that it's my job and my job only, and I'm just one human. I can't do it alone.
Right. So I've seen it before. I've lived it before. It's, like I mentioned in my speech, it's important to involve those other teams, but honestly, the way I've always gone about convincing them is A, your changes happen faster. B, you're the expert, not me. So, oh, sorry, I'm beating on the microphone. You're the expert, I'm not. I'm not an expert network engineer. I don't know anything about network tooling. So it makes sense that as a network engineer, you would want to learn how to do this, and then you can automate your things. You don't have to wait on this person, but at the same time, you're growing yourself. You're making your resume, I call it gold embellished. So that's all I've ever had to do to convince anyone. Just to be like, this is in your best interest, and these are the reasons why. And if you illustrate that to them in a way that's not, well, this is where we're going, so learn it or not. If you make it more personal than that, I've never had an issue saying, let's do this together. Anything else?
Do you have any advice for how you can, at a practitioner level, try to basically keep the personal empathetic values and all of that together while actually tying that to like a business value, to manager, C-level, et cetera, because those are not the same thing 90% of the time.
Right. So, like I said, empathy kind of comes from everything else. So whenever you bridge all of these other things, empathy kind of comes with it. But when you're tying it across, honestly, like I think happy people make better business. I think healthy people make better business. So that in itself should be a concern. And if it's not, then that is a problem. You can't go down to having a DevOps model if you don't care about your people, because your people are doing it for your business. So if you don't care about them, then you might be in the wrong line of work, I think. Does that answer your question? Because that was kind of a roundabout way of saying. Okay, cool.
I have a question.
Yes, Barry Baldrich.
Barry Baldrich, the third. So when you're driving change at these large organizations and you're bringing other people in and they're all flourishing, it's high touch. You're involved with all of these different teams. At what point do you let go and let them make, because they're going to make mistakes, but at what point do you let go? How do you decide when to let the team do their own thing? Because eventually you can't scale out to a whole company, right?
Right.
Well, I think you can, but other people in the room.
Right. So they'll start to do it on their own, really. Like at Carfax, in the beginning, it was very high touch. So my entire role was making chef work, making sure people could do chef bits on their own, and making sure that it worked for the business. My role then became make sure incoming people understand chef, because now we rely on chef and we rely on these processes. But now, really, it's just facilitating, honestly. The teams, they build each other up, and they know what's right. There's process in place that they're all comfortable with now. And so it just morphs on its own. And you'll know when you can step back and say, they know what's right. I'm just here to help. I'm just here to be the expert, quote unquote. Is that good? Anyone else? No? Okay, if nobody else has anything, then I'm done spilling my guts. I appreciate you coming. Thank you.